Ever been confused by terms like alpha acids, hop utilization, and isomerization? Don't worry, this is Home Brewing 101 and we're going to talk to you today about everything to do with hops.
So if you've seen our last episode, we were talking about malt. This time we're talking about hops and all of the amazing flavours, aromas, and exactly what they can do to your homebrewed beer.
Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably a fan of beer and you've experienced hops. Maybe you're thinking about getting into home brewing, or indeed you are already a home brewer, so you've had a hands-on experience with these wonderful, wonderful flowers. But it's worth just pointing out exactly what they are if you maybe don't know already. So hops are the flower, so the cone-type flower that grows on the Humulus lupulus plant. Now, specifically, they grow on the female variety of those plants, and they can deliver a huge amount to your beer in terms of flavour, aroma and bitterness.
Yes, actually, James, it's interesting at this point to bring in why hops were actually used in beer all those years ago.
Yeah.
And that's all to do with preservation. Hops have a natural preservative in them that is antiseptic, so it stops the beer going off.
Yeah, it was, way back when beer was first being brewed, quite sort of colloquially in smaller communities, their beer didn't have any hops in it, so it had to be drank fresh. Somebody somewhere, there's probably loads of brewing history out there that you can dig into, but discovered that you could add hops into that beer during the boiling phase, and it meant that the beer didn't spoil as quickly.
Somewhere in that history there's the difference between ale and beer, but we're not here to go into that right at the moment. We are here to delve into the amazing world of hops and just what they can bring.
So if we fast forward to modern brewing, and I say modern fairly loosely, in the last few hundred years or so, hops really deliver three key things to beer, other than the preservative nature that Rob just alluded to. They bring bitterness first and foremost, and that's probably what they're famous for, and we'll dive into how and why that works in a minute. But they bring that all-important bitterness, which means that you can just keep going back to a pint of beer, freshens up your palate, cleans your palate, makes you want to go back for more. Secondly, they add flavour, especially some of the more modern styles of hops. That flavour kind of shines through in slightly different ways. And then aroma. Right, and aroma can be so expressive with some hops that actually, I'm a massive hophead when we talk about those kind of like really aromatic, really flavoursome hops. Now, Rob, there's a key chemical compound in hops, isn't there, when we talk about bitterness? What's that?
Yep, we're talking about alpha acids. So generally, the higher the alpha acid is of the hop, the more bitterness that's going to bring to the beer. Now, I say generally because also in there comes exactly whereabouts in the brewing process that hop is used, but we'll go more into that a little bit later.
Yeah, but if you were to take the same weight of two different hop varieties with different alpha acid contents, added them to your boiling wort at exactly the same time, you would end up with beers that are fundamentally different bitterness levels.
Yeah.
So it's important that when you're building a recipe that you actually take note of those alpha acids, and also if you're trying to repeat that recipe, making sure that you check what the alpha acid is, because alpha acids are produced within the hop whilst it's growing, so the growing conditions each year for that harvest can change the alpha acid content.
Actually, and they can vary, they can swing quite a long way, especially if you've got two harvests that are next to each other, where one's a particular low alpha harvest and the next year is a particularly high, so there can be a big swing between those alphas in the same hop.
Now, generally speaking, there are four big growing regions within hop farming. I mean, they are produced all around the world, but there's four really famous kind of areas in the world where hops are produced. Rob, give us a couple of them.
Okay, so we've got the European growing nations, specifically really Germany and Czech Republic, Slovenia. We've got the UK.
Yeah.
Still producing, some beautiful hops. And we've got North America and the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah, and sort of specifically within North America, you've got like the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, that kind of area, Yakima. You know, those are the really famous hop growing regions within the US. And then, yeah, Southern Hemisphere, both Australia and New Zealand produce some absolute bangers. Within those growing regions, you tend to get slightly different expressive ways that hops come across, don't you?
You do, and actually I believe the word is terroir, James.
It is, yeah.
Actually we can get the same hop grown in different locations, and actually it's almost like they're a completely different hop.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the American hops tend to express themselves with lots of citrus notes, lots of sort of dank resinous notes, and also a fair amount of tropical fruit notes as well. In contrast to what we get here in the UK with our hops, which generally speaking, and I do say generally because there's some outliers there, but you tend to get sort of more earthy, spicy, woody tones coming through in hops grown here in the UK. Berries.
Slightly subtler.
Yeah.
You know, there's no doubt about it that the hops that we're producing here in the UK don't have the massively bold flavours that they can produce when they're grown in different locations, but that doesn't take away anything from how amazing British hops are.
Yeah,
and what
nuance,
they can bring.
right?
Yeah,
nuance,
yeah.
again, used in the right ways, you can just get just the right note. European hops, spicy, floral, sometimes sort of honeyed straw kind of notes, don't you find?
Yeah, you do, and actually it goes very much with the type of beer styles that come out of that region. So very famous for lager brewing, and those hops really suit that beer, or is it the beer suits the hops that were being produced in that country?
Or is it that they've both kind of grown up together, you know? And then if we look at those sort of New World hops, the Southern Hemisphere hops, you tend to get a lot of citrusy tropical notes, but specifically quite zingy kind of hop notes, especially from the stuff that comes from New Zealand.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the American hops that are really famous now, and New Zealand, Australian hops that are really, really popular now, were basically bred from European hops and English hops. But as I say, grown in a different location with a different weather and different soil types, just turn out to be completely different hops that bring something completely unique.
Now, in the last 5 to 10 years, actually, we've started to see the format in which hops come about and are produced for us to use change a fair amount. Now, we're going to touch now on the different formats of hops that are available, and I think we should probably start where it all begins, which is with whole hops.
So whole hops are the actual closest product that we have to what actually comes off the vine.
Yeah.
Basically, they're straight off the vine. They are kiln dried and then pressed into bales, and that's how we actually get them here at the malt miller before we break them down into typically 100-gram packets that you can buy. Now, generally across the world, the use of whole hops is really, really shrinking. In fact, many varieties aren't even available as whole hops anymore. No. The whole batch is pelletized.
And there's some reasons for that, you know, namely, using them is quite an inefficient way to brew because you lose quite a lot of your wort hop absorption, which is where, you know, the liquid gets soaked back into the dry flowers, and it can also be a bit of a messy job to clear up, especially on a commercial scale.
Yeah, sure, yeah, and they take up way more space as well, and actually way more space before they're used and way more space after they're used as well, whereas a hop pellet basically turns to sludge once it's been used, but before it's used it takes up way less space.
Yeah, but there are cases, and we're hearing it more and more and more from some of the professional breweries that we spend time with and the really experienced brewers out there, that actually in certain cases you can't beat a whole cone hop. Now, it's worth noting a little bit about the hop composition. So you have like petals on the outside, you break it open, inside there you'll see the kind of yellowy flower type pollen, which is called lupulin, which is where most of the aroma and flavour is. But then right down the middle, you have that kind of lupulin gland, don't you? The central stalk.
Bract.
Yeah, bract. That's the term I was looking for, which holds it all together. And there are some brewers that really advocate for that. Now, I don't know the science behind it. I'm not sure whether that's just kind of, you know, anecdotal stuff and people's preferences, but we are hearing it more and more and more from very successful commercial breweries.
Well, most notably the series that we've just done with Thornbridge, where they are massive advocates of using whole cone hops.
There are anecdotal notes that say that it helps with head retention, beer texture, just kind of roundness of flavour. I mean, it's very difficult to say, but there are some times where actually we enjoy using whole cone hops.
Yeah, definitely.
It's good fun.
Yeah. When the hops are pelletized, more of the green material that actually we don't really need in the brewing process is taken away. The whole cone hops are pushed through a die and they form pellets.
Yeah.
So as such, these pellets are kind of easier to transport because they're in smaller packaging. In some circumstances, if you've got the right equipment or are treating them the right way, they're much easier to use. They're certainly easier to weigh out.
Yeah.
On a homebrew scale, they're certainly easier to weigh out, but they're also more concentrated because they've got less of the green matter in that we don't need and more of the lupulin content actually that we do need.
Yeah, and they're really versatile as well because there's so much less in the way of vegetal matter and they're smaller. It makes using them throughout some of the different brewing processes that we're going to go into easier. Generally, you'll be able to extract quite a lot of flavour from them, especially when we're talking about dry hopping. So I think they're just the easiest go-to option in terms of hop format, especially if you're getting started with homebrewing.
You just need to make sure that we've got the right equipment to be able to filter them out or to whirlpool the kettle before draining the kettle through into the fermenter.
Now, a fairly modern interpretation of one of the hop varieties are the advanced pellets, right? So there's a few different versions of these available. The ones we tend to see most within homebrewing are, actually formerly called BBC, but those now fall into Bath Hass's pure hop pellet range, and also the Lupamax range of hop pellets. There are a few others that are used quite widely that are available to commercial brewers. So if you're looking at recipes that are from commercial brewers, you might see things like cryo hops or CGX. Basically, they're all this same advanced pellet, which is more enriched ultimately. So you mentioned a minute ago about how the whole cone hop versus a T90 is more refined, so there's less vegetal matter. Well, these are another step on again, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're also done at much colder temperatures as well, which preserves the lupulin and the really delicate aromatic qualities of the hops much better.
Where that really pays dividend for us as a brewer, similar to the T90, the standard hop pellets, you're going to increase your yield slightly with these. So if you look at the whole cones versus using the standard pellets, your yield will increase marginally. Again, if you're going from the standard pellets to the advanced pellets, you might need to use less of them for the same recipe. So again, you're increasing your yield because the more hops you add in whatever format, beer gets absorbed into them. Now, you tend to see these advanced pellets being used in certain circumstances. I don't know of anybody, and I might be wrong, but that's using advanced pellets for their bittering edition.
No, and the reason is because obviously the advanced pellets are more expensive, so we really don't need to use them for bittering.
No, because they're really focused on flavour and aroma, right?
Exactly that. So we use them late on in the boil or especially for dry hop.
Yeah, and whirlpool as well, right? Exactly. Again, commercial breweries are using these because they get amped up flavour but also increased yields, and it's exactly the same for us as home brewers. And you tend to see the varieties that show up in these advanced pellets being the big hitters, things like Citra, Mosaic, the big names that are really popular for juicy IPAs, big West Coast IPAs, all the things that require a lot of hops. That's really what's driven this technology forward. Speaking of advancements in technology, Rob, we are in a fairly new world at the moment with hop products. The last few years, we've seen an explosion of a new category hit the scene. What's that?
Yeah, these are liquid hop products, but we don't want to confuse you with hop bittering extracts that have been available for years and years and years. These are completely different. These are varietal specific liquid hops that are designed to use at various different stages in the brewing process, and they are absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and the two that we really have open access to as homebrewers are called Incognito and Spectrum. Incognito is primarily designed to be a whirlpool hop edition. We'll talk about whirlpooling in a minute. And Spectrum is designed to be a dry hop addition. Now, there are breweries out there playing around with when to add them. There are home brewers out there playing around with where to add them. But loosely speaking, that's the way they're both designed. And again, as we were saying a minute ago, with the yield gains that you get with these, there is no losses because it's a liquid, so it disperses into your wort or beer, and there's no vegetable matter in there at all.
Their lasting ability within the beer is absolutely amazing. So if you're dry hopping with Spectrum, it hangs around in the beer for way longer than the flavour and aroma would if you're using T90s, for example.
And these are really, they are derived from the hops that they say they are. So if you're buying Citra Incognito or Mosaic Spectrum, they come from those hops. But like you said, the treatment that they've had, the process they've been through just means that they are really enriched, super potent, and absolutely delicious.
The other really big advantage that these have, and not so important on a homebrew scale possibly, but the losses, you just don't get any losses from adding them. So you add 20 grams of Spectrum, which is a
100-gram equivalent.
100-gram equivalent of hop pellet. You're not losing that litre of beer.
Right, we talked earlier about alpha acids, didn't we, Rob? And that they are an essential part of the hop and what we want in our beer. But what actually happens when you add the hops to your boiling wort? What happens to that alpha acid?
Right, okay, so it gets isomerized, which means it dissolves into the liquid that you're boiling and actually produces that bitterness.
And if we add them at 60 minutes, most recipes you boil for 60 minutes, you add a charge of hops at that 60-minute mark. By the time that you hit the end of your boil, so after 60 minutes, they will have pretty much fully isomerized. But we can balance it, can't we? So we can add hops later on in the boil, so maybe 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, or indeed right at the end of the boil for a flame out addition. And the amount that they isomerize decreases the further on in the boil you go.
Yeah, in its most basic terms, the longer you boil the hops for, the more alpha acid you get out of the hop. The less time, the less alpha acid you get, but possibly the more flavour and aroma as well, depending on where you're using it in the boiling process. Now,
there are a few things that can impact actually the effectiveness of that. So one being how high the gravity is of your beer. If you've got a much higher gravity beer that you're boiling, you can affect the hop utilisation somewhat. Like you said, the time that you put them into the boil, and most importantly, the alpha acid content in that hop itself. If you've got a hop that's got 2% alpha acid or 3% alpha acid, you have to put a hell of a lot in to the boil if you want to get even to 15, 20 IBUs, so bitterness units. Whereas if you use something that's got 14, 15% in, it's significantly less that you have to add.
And we've got calculators on our website where you can dial in what the alpha acid is of the hop, how long you're boiling it for, and it will give you an idea of what the IBUs, the international bittering units, will end up in that beer.
Let's take a look at the hopping techniques that are available. Now, we've already talked about boil additions and what happens there. You put hops in during the boil, they turn into bitterness. The further down the boil time you add them, you're balancing bitterness with flavour and aroma. But then we've got things that have really come to the forefront in the last 15, 20 years of brewing. Number one being whirlpooling.
Yeah, so to whirlpool, we are generally turning off the power to our boiler, whatever that may be. These are flame out or whirlpool hops. We're turning off the power to our boiler. We may be, or maybe not, letting it cool down to 80 degrees. And 80 degrees is one of these kind of magic numbers that does get bandied about. We'll go into that. The hops are added after the boil and they're left to basically stew in the liquid for an amount of time before the kettle is then drained to the fermenter.
And this is all about adding aroma predominantly to the beer at this point. There is some flavour carryover as well, but big punchy aroma is extracted during the whirlpool.
Now, the reason this 80 degrees is quite an important number, because around about that 80-degree mark, that's where you start gaining bitterness from the hops, but what you do get is aroma and flavour.
Yeah, but it's also high enough that it stays sanitary as well. So 80 degrees really seems to be like the sweet spot. 75 some places opt for. Indeed, though, we are seeing breweries still whirlpooling up in the 90s as well. And again, it brings distinctiveness to their beers. So it's something to really have some fun playing around with. One thing we'd say with whirlpooling on a homebrew level, though, is you might read a recipe and it says whirlpool for 15 minutes. We're advocates of extending your whirlpool time. So we'll often do a 30-minute whirlpool and then transfer it into a fermenter, which might take another 15 minutes or so. So you're getting that extended contact time with the hops to really drive out as much as you can from them. Right, so probably the most famous, like the headliner of hop utilization in modern brewing is dry hopping, right? Now, what are we doing when we dry hop?
Basically, we are putting hops into the fermenter. Now, we can do that at various different stages during fermentation, but basically when we talk about dry hopping, it is hops into the fermenter before packaging your beer.
And there's, like Rob said, there's a few different techniques and like ways that this can happen. And
we could argue about this for a long time.
We could.
Best method of dry hopping, and actually it's a really hot topic at the moment, of when to add your dried hops, whereabouts during fermentation to add them. Do I add it when I add the yeast? Do I add them when fermentation is completely finished?
Or somewhere in between?
Somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And actually, as you say, it's a great place to actually experiment with the different flavours that you can get in adding dry hops in different parts of the fermentation or post-fermentation process.
I'm a big fan in all of my beers really that use hops of wait until fermentation is done, do a diacetyl rest to make sure that I haven't got any diacetyl there, soft crash my beer down to 15 degrees, get rid of the yeast, then add my hops. But I know that there are a load of people out there that love adding hops during active fermentation, doing like a double dry hop process. So they'll do a dry hop during fermentation and then they'll do another one at the end. And you can get an interaction between the hops and the yeast when they're in there together, something called biotransformation, which can produce lots of juicy, fruity flavors and aromas. And I know there's a lot of people playing with that, so it might be something that you want to have a go with if you're brewing a juicy, hazy kind of style of beer.
So equally, we're getting a lot of people that are using a combination of some pellet hops and some liquid hops in the dry hop process.
Yeah, just to see what the interaction is there. And there are some arguments as well that spectrum is really interesting when you add it right at the beginning of fermentation, just when you hit that point where your krausen, your foam on top of the beer is just really set, and the interaction there can be really interesting. So loads of fun to be had. I've got an important question at this point though, Rob. What's your 3 favourite hops?
Oh, okay, that's like been put on to me. So it's difficult because hops used in different ways, tricky. However, I have got 3. Motueka has got to be in there in my top 3.
Limey,
originally developed as a lager hop, actually, grown in New Zealand, but used in larger quantities in a IPA. Absolutely amazing. And like you say, that it can really bring that lime quality that it's just absolutely delicious. Centennial is probably my all-time favourite. Bell's Two Hearted's absolutely stacked full of Centennial, one of my favourite beers of all time. There's loads of others that I could choose, but I just Citra, for its ability to be able to be used on its own or being able to be paired with various different hops, and when you do that, it brings different things to the party. So yeah, that's my 3. Yours?
Right. Oh, again, difficult one. I didn't actually pre-plan this. I literally just asked you on the spot. I think for me, I've got to have Mosaic up there. It's a stalwart. It's in all of my beers pretty much. Works really well with Citra.
Yeah.
It's a little bit danker, sort of tropical fruit, kind of overripeness going on in there, which I love. Then I'm bringing it back home for this one, and I think East Kent Goldings. Nuance, hay, cut grass, floral, a little bit spicy in a best bitter is absolutely delicious. And then I'm going to go European for my next one.
SARS.
Absolutely. Every single day of the week. Love it. Now, a really important thing when we talk about hops is freshness, okay? So hops are harvested every year, and a good retailer will tell you what year that hop has been harvested, but it's only half the story. Really, one thing that is key is being able to know the batch code for those hops, isn't it, Rob?
When we talk about hop freshness, it's more about how the hops have been handled and stored. You can get the very latest of harvest of hops, but if they've not been treated carefully, they'll be absolute bobbins. It's just not worth using them. It's all about how they are treated, kept and stored. There's a few really important things that we need to do with hops.
Hops basically have a couple of enemies. One is oxygen, the other is light. Those are pretty much the two big ones, but then the third one is temperature as well. All of those things over time degrade the organic compounds in the hops. They oxidize and, well, basically, like you say, bobbins, right?
Yeah.
Just turn into nothing good to man the beast. So if you've got hops at home that you're storing, make sure they're kept in a cold environment, fridge, freezer, something like that. If you can, make sure they're in sealable bags that you can get as much of the air out of as possible. And thirdly, make sure they're in some kind of packaging environment that is not permeable to UV light. Now, luckily, here at the Malt Miller, we take care of all of that for you. So we store your hops cold store here before they get broken down into packaging, into smaller packets for you. We then store them in our cold store until they are then shipped to you. When you get them, put them in the fridge at home.
Yeah, don't be tempted to open them up and give them a sniff.
No.
Not before brew day. Just leave them as they are in the cold.
Yeah, and that's a really important point because especially our hops are all packaged in nitrogen, so there's very little oxygen in the bags.
0.1%, James.
0.1%, which means that again we're preserving those flavours and aromas for you. And all of our bags are resealable as well. So if you are buying bags that you're going to use a bit of and then reuse the rest later on, you can seal them back up, stick them in the fridge, you're good to go. The other thing as well is that you can look up the batch codes for all of our hops. That means you're going to be able to know that what's in the bag is actually what that batch code takes you back to. In some cases, all the way back to exactly what farm it was farmed on and where it was harvested. So those things are important because we believe freshness is key, but also transparency around what you're buying is really important.
Actually, just talking a little bit more about that batch code, James, because this is a really important point. So we buy hops in here from loads of different merchants. Let's just take Bathhaus, for example. When we get a 5 kilo or a 20 kilo bale in from Bathhaus, that always has a batch number on it, and that batch number has been the same batch number right from the field.
Yep.
So the batch number from that bale we print on the bag of hops that are then sold to our customers. So that means that there's complete traceability of those hops right back to, in this instance, Bathhaus, which actually means if a customer wanted to, they could actually circumnavigate us because they would be able to check out the batch code on the bag and actually find out that without us being involved.
Yep.
And that's a really important point.
Yeah. So we trust that's given you a really good overview of hops. Again, we've got other content on the channel about hops that you can dive into, but it's homework time. And guess what? We're back to smash beers. If you want to experiment with hops, brew some smash beers, right? Get that recipe that you know and love that uses a single malt and a single yeast. Start switching out the hops. When you get to a point where you've found a couple of single hops that you really enjoy, guess what? Stick them together, right? Play around with that part of, recipe creation, because you're really going to start to experience how things work together as well. But one other thing for me, Rob, I think when it comes to hop homework, go and buy some hoppy beers.
Oh yeah, buy some commercial beer, especially if you can find some single hop commercial beers, so you can actually get the flavour that's driving within that beer.
Yeah.
And actually, if you can get hold of some of the hop waters that are starting to become quite popular now, a lot of those are a single variety, and actually they're a brilliant tool for being able to decipher individual hop flavours, what that hop is bringing to the beer in a non-alcoholic hop water. It's excellent.
And if you've got some hops that you've bought as part of a recipe kit, actually something that can be also quite nice to do is just grab one of the pellets out. Say you've got something that's got 3 or 4 different hop varieties and just grab a single pellet of each of them out. Give it a rub in your fingers, rub it in the palm of your hand, give it a really good smell, and you'll start to really pick up the nuance and the difference that comes across in those hop pellets. It'll just give you inspiration to go forward and play around in future recipes.
We know there's loads of you out there with a huge amount of knowledge about hop combinations, when to use what, at what stage during the brewing process. So we'd love to have your experiences explained to us in the comments below. You can teach other brewers so much.
And equally, if you've got questions about anything that we've covered or not covered here, drop them down in the comments section below and we'll come back to you. But if you've made it to the end of this video and you're not already subscribed to our channel, please do, and hit the bell for notifications so you can stay up to date with all of the fun we're having here at Malt HQ. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, that really does help us out. And you can follow us over on our social platforms, so Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and do make sure that you subscribe to our newsletter in the link below. Have a great brew.
Cheers.